Hey guys, how's it going? Leek here. I wanted to make a video to discuss quality of life and approachability improvements that I would like to see added to the Hunter class to align with the new class design direction in Midnight. In October, Blizzard released a blog post titled Combat for Everyone, which addresses how combat is being made more approachable and how class mechanics that may not be clear or intuitive are being removed. These changes also aim to reduce cognitive load. If you haven't seen this blog post, I'll put it in the video description because it's a good read and all the topics in this video will be in relation to the design direction. This video will be mostly issues that affect all three Hunter specs, but there will be some survival specific feedback in the end. So with that being said, let's get into it. So the first thing that I want to talk about is Hunter's Mark. Hunter's Mark is receiving some very nice changes in Midnight. Instead of causing the target to take 5% increased damage only when they're above 80% health, it is now a permanent 3% increased damage taken, regardless of health percent. And this is a great change. However, you still have to manually cast it on every single target. This can get annoying and frustrating in content where you're constantly swapping targets, such as open world content, delves, Mythic Plus, or raid fights with multiple target swaps. What if casting a single target ability applied Hunter's Mark to your target, but only if no other target is marked? For example, you can still manually cast Hunter's Mark on a boss. If you do this, Hunter's Mark won't be applied to any new targets unless you manually cast Hunter's Mark yourself. If Hunter's Mark is not present on any target, casting Raptor Strike or Kill Command or Aim Shot would apply Hunter's Mark. This would allow you to freely swap targets without having to mark every single one manually. This is similar to how Hunter's Mark works in Mists of Pandaria, and it's also similar to how other debuffs, such as Chaos Brand and Mystic Touch, are applied. Having the option to auto-apply it would still give us that fantasy of marking our target, while making this debuff apply similar to other debuffs and increasing quality of life. So next I want to talk about pet move speed. Players have become more and more mobile as WoW has progressed. Classes now have multiple gap closers or abilities for short bursts of movement or increased movement speed. However, pet movement speed has remained constant and is falling behind just how quickly the player can move or forced movement phases caused in raids. For example, raid bosses like Plexus Sentinel, Rashanan, Cauldron of Carnage, Queen Ansurek intermissions, or even Silken Court when the bosses charge or teleport. These bosses can move large distances in a very short amount of time. The player might be able to keep up with the bosses, but the pet isn't always able to. This leaves both Beast Mastery and Survival in an awkward position. Beast Mastery hunters can be in range of these bosses but can't cast their abilities because the pet is lagging behind. Survival can lose their Mastery buff because the pet's too far away, but also be unable to generate focus entirely. Survival generates focus from Kill Command, which requires the pet to be near the boss, not the player. So pets have an ability called Dash, which lets them move quickly for a short period of time. Dash is something that the hunter needs to micromanage if they want their pet to even have a chance at keeping up with bosses. If you have Dash on autocast, chances are it won't even help you here at all. Your pet might autocast Dash at a bad time and now it's unavailable to be used when movement is necessary. This is just a small micromanage that many hunters don't find fun or are even willing to do. I feel like with the class changes coming in Midnight and the increased focus on accessibility, something should be done about pet mobility in PvE. Perhaps making Dash just permanently active in PvE content or adding something similar to the old hunter talent Blink Strikes, which lets your pet teleport to enemies. So next I want to talk about Misdirection targeting. Currently, many players either use a weak aura or a macro to cast Misdirection on the tank. Without this weak aura, players would need to do one of three things. 1. They could use a macro to cast Misdirection on their focus target. This might work in raid, but in Mythic Plus you'll often have a focus target that you plan on using your kick on, which means setting the tank as your focus target just complicates things even more. 2. You can make a macro and manually enter your tank's name into the macro for the target. So again, this might work fine in raid where you consistently have the same tank, but for Mythic Plus you would have to change this macro every single time you have a new tank. 3. You could manually click your misdirect target every single time you cast Misdirection. This one works, but in reality it just feels more frustrating and annoying than anything else. So that being said, what if Misdirection had smart targeting? So for example, Augmentation Evokers have smart targeting with Ebb and Might and Prescience. These abilities prefer DPS targets if the Evoker isn't specifically targeting anyone. Using this as an example, Misdirect could automatically be cast on the tank if you don't have anyone targeted. It could prioritize tanks in group content and your pet when you're solo. If you do have a friendly targeted, however, Misdirection would still cast on that target like normal. A change like this could make Misdirection easier to use and require less macros or add-ons to set up properly. So next up is Disengage. Disengage is a movement tool that sends your character backwards. However, it's very common to use Disengage to go forwards instead. To do this, the player has to spin their character 180 degrees and then disengage. Some people might say this is a form of skill expression, and for the most part, I agree with them, but Disengage can still be inconsistent even for veteran players. For example, if you spin around too quickly and then you disengage, you can just be sent in the wrong direction. What if Hunters had an option, similar to Mages, where you can choose how Disengage behaves? This option can just let you choose to either have your Disengage send you forwards, or have your Disengage send you backwards. Mages can speak to any Mage trainer to change how Blink functions. Arcane Momentum is what Mages learn, and it causes their Blink to send them in the direction they're moving, rather than the direction that they're facing. Something like this could be a simple change that makes Disengage more approachable and less frustrating to use. So one last thing that affects all three Hunter specs involves the Cooldown Manager. Currently on Alpha, the Cooldown Manager still can't track some essential buffs or debuffs for playing Hunter. For example, the Howl of the Pack Leader timer for Pack Leader can't be shown at all. This means that you can't track how much time remains until your next Pack Leader beast is ready. You can only track when the beast is available and when your next kill command will spawn a beast. Additionally, Sentinel now plays around a debuff called Sentinel's Mark. It would be nice for the Cooldown Manager to have some way to display when any target has a mark applied to them. Some type of buff or debuff filter that would allow us to add our own tracking to the Cooldown Manager could help us out a lot here. So now that all the general Hunter stuff's out of the way, I want to cover some survival specific concerns as well. So the most important thing that I want to cover for survival is our mastery. Our mastery is called Spirit Bond, and Spirit Bond increases the damage that you and your pet deal, and this buff is doubled when you and your pet are within 25 yards of each other. If you and your pet are further than 25 yards apart, you get a 10-second buff warning you that Spirit Bond is about to fall off when that timer ends. In most raid and dungeon fights, this isn't an issue. However, there have been more and more bosses designed where this has become problematic. So first of all, the Hunter Pet AI will always attempt to make your pet attack from behind. This by itself isn't an issue, but it is an issue on big bosses when combined with Spirit Bond. Large, stationary bosses like Dimensius, Bloodbound Horror, parts of Gallywix, and even mobile bosses like Silken Court can cause issues with Spirit Bond. So for example, this clip of the last phase of Dimensius. So first off, I just want to say, don't pay attention to the gameplay. I'm not trying to play optimally or anything. I'm just here to show off the issues with pets and with Spirit Bond. So I have a weak aura set up to track Spirit Bond because it just isn't feasible to track this in the base UI. You can see that immediately after landing on the Dimensius platform, my weak aura shows me that I start losing Spirit Bond. If I wanted to view this in the base UI, I need to look in the top right corner of my screen where the buffs are all constantly shifting around. So I'm not doing anything crazy here, I'm just attacking the boss like normal. And doing the boss like normal caused me to lose Spirit Bond, and now both myself and my pet are doing 31% less damage. You can even see me run around the boss trying to find my pet. Because the boss is constantly being rotated, my pet is also constantly moving. Now you might think, why don't you just stand near your pet? And the answer is that you can't. Boss mechanics will require you to be in specific areas of the room or have you doing specific mechanics. If I were to go and run near my pet, I might not be able to do the Mythic Dimensia's gravity mechanic. I might die to Shadowquake, or I might be out of range of the safe stars during Devour. It's just not feasible for me to play near my pet in Mythic rating. I can't even see where my pet is during the boss fight. Even if I was able to safely run near my pet, how am I supposed to find it mid-fight? So there are two tricks to try and maintain Spirit Bond uptime, but they're not intuitive at all. The first is the pet follow trick. You can see here that I go and click the pet follow button. Hitting pet follow in combat will force your pet to stay by your side, and they'll keep fighting the boss as long as you're in melee range. This isn't perfect though. If you leave melee range for any reason, your pet's just going to follow you and your pet will also stop attacking. Additionally, if you have any macros that cause your pet to attack, the follow mode is going to be disabled. The other trick is to constantly micromanage your pet's position during the fight. Again, this is very unintuitive. Players might not even realize that Spirit Bond fell off, and they don't know how to fix the issue with the base UI. Spirit Bond falling off is an issue that all survival hunters have run into, whether they've realized it or not. With Midnight focusing more on accessibility and approachability, I think it's time to change this mastery. A simple fix would be increasing the Spirit Bond range to 50 yards. And this is the max range of kill command, and it would make sense. If your pet can kill command, then your pet can also buff you with Spirit Bond. Another idea would be to remove the range component entirely, and just let the buff always be active if your pet is alive. This issue, combined with the pet speed issues, leaves hunters having to deal with mechanics that aren't clear or intuitive. Instead of focusing on fighting the boss or playing our spec optimally, we feel like pet AI and unclear buff uptime is taking our attention instead. So one new issue for survival in this expansion is our loot pool. So going into Midnight, survival is now able to dual wield, so that means we can use one-handed daggers, swords, and axes. So what this means is that our loot pool essentially has twice the amount of weapon drops. So for example, in Midnight, there's 5 2-hand weapons and 5 1-hand weapons just from dungeon drops alone. So if we wanted a specific item from our weekly grade vault, the odds of getting that item are now much lower than they are in the War Within. Other specs that have used multiple weapon types, like Fury Warriors and Frost DKs, have been able to change their loot specs so that they could isolate 2-hand weapons. Warriors have been able to set their loot spec to arms, and Frost DK could set it to unholy. Survival doesn't have this privilege. We can only swap our loot spec to ranged, which excludes us from melee weapon drops entirely. And not only does this exclude melee weapons, but every season typically includes trinkets that only drop for melee specs, or only drop for ranged specs. For example, in Season 3 of War Within, there's the Cursed Stone Idol from Halls of Atonement, and the Incorporeal Warp Claw from Eco Dome Aldani. Tazavesh also has trinkets that are only melee or only ranged DPS. So not only is Survival unable to isolate specific weapons, but our only way to filter weapons at all will exclude us from looting melee trinkets. So what if there was some type of toggle or an option to allow us to pick a weapon type? It doesn't have to be as specific as like daggers or polearms, but something as general as only show me one-handed weapons or only show me two-handed weapons. This way, players don't dilute their loot pool and they can only see weapons that fit their playstyle or desired gameplay. So one quality of life issue that Survival has is our new spell Flamefang Pitch. So this spell is cool thematically, but there is one very annoying aspect to it. This is a ground targeted AoE that also leaves an AoE on the ground that mobs can just run out of. A 1-minute cooldown on what is essentially a slightly stronger wildfire bomb that also places a ground AoE that mobs can run out of just doesn't feel good. We just dealt with this issue with Lunar Storm during the War Within, which was addressed by increasing the radius and making Lunar Storm move. This same exact issue existed with Death and Decay, Wild Spirits, and Soulforge Embers, just to name a few of them. The problem is that we have no control over mobs or bosses that can just be moved or move themselves out of the AoE effect of a spell with a long cooldown. Bosses like Soul Hunters and Nexus King Saladar are constantly moving and they won't stay inside Flamefang Pitch for the full duration. Other bosses this expansion have had this issue as well. In Nerebar Palace, for example, several bosses were constantly moving, like Sikran, Ovanax, Kaiveza, and Silken Court. And these are just some examples of bosses just from the raid where bosses or ads are constantly moving out of ground effects. Another unfortunate loss this expansion is the removal of Terms of Engagement. So Terms of Engagement is a talent that we have in the War Within, and this causes the cooldown of Harpoon to reset whenever you kill an enemy that gives experience or honor. It also grants a small amount of focus regen whenever you cast Harpoon. With this removed, we can no longer reset the cooldown of Harpoon when we kill an enemy. And for open world content, this feels really bad. And I can understand losing the focus regen from Terms, but did we really need to lose the mobility from it as well? It's very noticeable when you do outdoor world content like World Quests, Delves, or Battlegrounds. And I would love to see an option to retain the mobility from Terms of Engagement while removing the focus generation portion of the talent, just so Terms of Engagement could remain strictly for mobility. So one last thing for Survival is just a minor gripe with Takedown. So Takedown is our new DPS cooldown in Midnight, and it forces us to charge the target, which can sometimes get us killed. It feels really bad to see our DPS cooldown available, but be potentially unable to use it just because the charge would get us killed. I think it would be nice to see either some type of choice node here that lets you remove the charge, or to just remove the charge entirely and give us a second charge of Harpoon, for example. Anyway, if you've made it this far, thank you for watching and listening to me talk about all this. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you agree with my suggestions? Do you think there should be more changes made? Do you think none of these should be added? Let me know your thoughts because this is a pretty important matter. Thank you for watching and I'll see you in the next video.